The Sunstone Sanctuary had always been a place of warmth and golden radiance, where the ancient magic of light weavers had burned steadily for 1,000 years. Now, it was a tomb of failing luminescence. Elora pressed her palm against the crystalline wardstone embedded in the sanctuary wall, pouring her dwindling reserves of magic into protective barrier. The golden light that should have surged through the stone like liquid sunlight barely managed a weak flicker before dying completely. Her hand trembled as she pulled away, the bitter taste of failure sharp on her tongue. "It's not working," Master Celeste whispered from behind her, the elderly witch's voice cracking with exhaustion and barely suppressed terror. "The plague consumes faster than we can heal. We've lost 3 more sisters since dawn." Elora turned to face the sanctuary's great hall, and her heart shattered at the sight. Dozens of witches lay on pallets arranged in precise, desperate rows. Their skin, once luminous with the natural glow of sunstone magic, had turned ashen and gray. Black veins spiderwebbed across their faces and arms, pulsing with a darkness that seemed to actively resist the healing light her sisters tried to pour into them. The blight, they called it, a magical plague that had appeared 6 weeks ago at the edge of their territory and spread like wildfire through their protective wards as if they were made of paper. It consumed magic itself, feeding on the very essence that made the Sunstone Witches what they were. Those infected didn't just die. They were hollowed out, their magic devoured from the inside until nothing remained but empty husks. "How many?" Elora asked, though she already knew the answer would destroy her. 43 dead, 27 infected and failing fast. Celeste's weathered hand gripped Elora's shoulder. "You're the last of the pure bloodline, child. Your grandmother's power flows through you undiluted. If you fall to the blight, the entire lineage dies with you." Elora watched as young Mira, barely 16, convulsed on her pallet, her screams of agony echoing through the hall. The healers rushed to her side, their hands glowing with golden light, but the blight only seemed to feed on their magic, growing stronger with each attempted cure. "There has to be something," Elora said desperately. "Another healing spell, a different configuration of the wards, a purification ritual we haven't tried." "There is one option." The voice came from the shadows near the sanctuary doors. Elder Thane emerged, his face grim and haunted. He was the oldest among them, nearly 200 years old, and the keeper of their most forbidden knowledge. "One power strong enough to consume the blight before it consumes us." The temperature in the hall seemed to drop 10 degrees. Every conscience which turned to stare at Thane with expressions of horror and understanding. "No," Celeste breathed. "Thane, you can't be suggesting." "The Shadow Wolves." His words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of fear through the gathered witches. Specifically, the Night Alpha himself. His power is tied to pure darkness and moonlight. The blight feeds on our light magic, because light is predictable, ordered, controlled. But shadow? Shadow is chaos and consumption. It would devour the blight like a flame consumes parchment. "The treaty forbids contact," another elder protested. After the Blood Moon Wars, both sides swore to remain separate. To break that treaty by summoning him would be an act of war. "We're already dying." Elora's voice cracked through the hall like a whip. She stepped forward, her golden eyes blazing with desperate determination. "What good is a treaty if there's no one left to honor it? We have days, maybe hours, before the blight reaches critical mass. When it does, it won't stop with us. It will spread to the human settlements, to the other magical bloodlines, to everything touched by light." She turned to Thane, her decision already made. "Tell me how to summon him." "The forbidden ritual. The ritual chamber beneath the sanctuary was a place of ancient power and older fears. Elora descended the spiral stone staircase, each step taking her deeper into the earth, further from the comforting warmth of sunlight. The walls were carved with warnings in the old tongue, languages that predated the Sunstone Witches themselves. Here sleeps the boundary between light and shadow. Cross at your peril. Thane had given her the ritual scroll with hands that shook. The summoning will work, he'd said quietly. But you must understand, Elora, the Night Alpha doesn't give aid freely. His price will be terrible. Everything about the Shadow Wolves is payment and debt. They deal in soul contracts, in bindings that can't be broken. Whatever he asks, you may have no choice but to accept. I understand, she replied, though she didn't. Not really. How could anyone understand the price of dealing with a creature born from pure moonlight and darkness? Now, standing in the center of the ritual chamber, she laid out the components with trembling hands. Black moonstone dust to mark the circle, silver wolf's bane to attract his attention, and at the center, a bowl of her own blood mixed with crushed sunstone, the ultimate offering from a light witch to a creature's shadow. The chamber was circular, its walls inscribed protective runes that glowed faintly with residual magic from centuries of use. But these runes were different from the ones above. These were designed not to keep darkness out, but to contain it should the summoning go wrong. Elora pricked her finger with the ritual blade, letting crimson drops fall into the bowl. The moment her blood touched the crushed sunstone, it began to glow in eerie golden light that seemed wrong in this place of shadows. She began the incantation in the old tongue, her voice steady despite her racing heart. From shadow born and moonlight woven, I call the Alpha, oath unbroken. By blood and stone in desperate need, I summon thee to hear my plea. Night King, Shadow Walker, Hunter in the dark, I offer payment for thy mark. The words fell heavy on her tongue, each syllable carrying weight that pressed against her magic. The air in the chamber grew thick and cold. The torches along the walls flickered wildly, their flames turning from gold to silver to black. Nothing happened. Elora's heart sank. Had she performed the ritual incorrectly? Was the scroll a fake, a myth designed to keep desperate fools from? The temperature plummeted so suddenly that her breath came out in visible clouds. Ice crystals formed on the stone walls, spreading outward from a single point in the center of the ritual circle. The bowl of blood and sunstone began to steam, the golden light turning dark, corrupted, wrong. Then the shadows themselves began to move. They peeled away from the walls like living things, slithering across the floor toward the center of the circle. They twisted and coiled, building upward in a column of pure darkness that seemed to absorb all light. The very air screamed as reality bent around the forming shape. And then he was there, the Night Alpha. Rhys didn't step out of the shadows. He was made of them. One moment there was only darkness, and the next a figure of terrible, impossible beauty stood in the center of her ritual circle. He was taller than any man she'd ever seen, his frame powerful and predatory in ways that made her instincts scream danger. His skin was pale as moonlight, almost luminescent in the darkness, covered in intricate black markings that moved like living smoke across his arms and chest. His hair was the color of midnight, falling past his shoulders in waves that seemed to absorb light. But it was his eyes that truly terrified her. They were silver, not gray, but pure, metallic silver that reflected light like polished mirrors. And they were utterly, completely cold. There was intelligence there, ancient and vast, but no warmth, no humanity, just the patient, predatory calculation of an apex predator studying potential prey. He wore clothing that seemed woven from shadow itself, dark leather and fabric that moved independently of any wind, constantly shifting like smoke. At his throat gleamed a collar of silver and black stone, and Elora recognized it from forbidden texts. The Alpha's crown, a manifestation of his absolute authority over the Shadow Wolves. When he spoke, his voice was like frost forming on glass, beautiful and deadly. A sunstone which summons the Night Alpha. He tilted his head, studying her with those mirror-bright eyes. Either you're desperate beyond measure or you're a fool. Perhaps both. Elora forced herself to stand straight, to meet his gaze even though every instinct screamed at her to bow, to submit, to run. I'm desperate. My people are dying from a magical plague that consumes light itself. We have days before the blight spreads beyond our borders and kills thousands. And you believe I care about the deaths of witches? He moved then, a fluid, predatory glide that brought him to the edge of the ritual circle. The protective runes blazed with golden light, forming a barrier between them. He studied the glowing symbols with detached amusement. Clever. You've caged me in my own summoning. But these wards won't hold long against true shadow, little witch. So speak quickly. What do you want from the King of Darkness? Your power. The words came out steadier than she felt. The blight feeds on light magic. It grows stronger with every healing spell, every protective ward we erect. But shadow is different. Shadow consumes everything. Your magic could devour the blight before it spreads further. Rhys laughed, and the sound was like breaking ice. You want me to save your people, to use my power, earned through centuries of blood and sacrifice, to cure a plague threatening your precious light weavers. The audacity is almost admirable. He leaned closer to the barrier, and Elora saw her reflection in his silver eyes, small, fragile, burning with desperate hope. Let me explain something, little Sunstone. I am not a hero. I am not a savior. I am the thing your grandmothers warned you about in bedtime stories. I am the darkness that hunts those foolish enough to wander too far from their safe, warm lights. Why would I help you? Because Elora's voice cracked, and she forced herself to continue. Because you're bound by the summoning. I offered blood and sunstone. I called you by the old rites. The ancient laws say you must hear my plea and name your price. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in those silver eyes. Respect, perhaps, or dark amusement. So you do know some of the old ways. Yes, I am bound to hear you. And yes, I will name my price. But first, let me see the extent of the damage you've wrought upon yourselves. He raised one hand, and the shadows in the chamber surged forward, pressing against a protective circle. The golden runes flickered and strained. Elora felt the immense pressure of his power testing her wards, probing for weaknesses. She poured more magic into the barrier, her sunstone magic flaring bright and hot. But it wasn't enough. The shadows found a crack, a microscopic flaw in the weaving, and in an instant they shattered the entire ward structure. The protective circle exploded outward in a shower of golden sparks that died the moment they touched the spreading darkness. Rhys stepped forward, now free of containment, and Elora stumbled backward until her spine hit the cold stone wall. He followed with that same predatory grace, closing the distance until he stood mere inches away. This close, she could feel the cold radiating from him, could see the shadows that moved beneath his skin like a second circulatory system. "Show me," he commanded, his voice absolute. Before she could protest, he pressed 2 fingers to her forehead. Ice-cold power slammed into her mind, rifling through her memories with brutal efficiency. She gasped at the invasion, tried to push him out, but it was like trying to move a mountain with her bare hands. He saw everything. The first victims of the blight, the failed healing attempts, the rapidly spreading infection, the fear in her sister's eyes as they realized they were powerless to stop it. When he finally withdrew, Elora collapsed to her knees, her vision swimming. Rhys stood above her, his expression unchanged, but his eyes, there was something new there. Interest. A magical plague that consumes light, he mused. Born from corrupted lunar magic. If I'm reading the signature correctly, someone weaponized moonlight and turned it against you. Clever and deeply blasphemous. He crouched down to her level, bringing those silver eyes level with hers. I can cure it. My shadow will devour the corruption utterly. But you already know I don't grant favors, little witch. Everything has a price. Name it, Elora said immediately. Gold, artifacts, territory, whatever you want. If it's within my power to give, it's yours. I don't want your gold. His smile was sharp and cold. I want you. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Elora's blood turned to ice. What? A soul contract. Seal with a ritual bite. Your magic, your essence, your very being bound to mine. You'll become tethered to me. What I feel, you feel. Where I go, you go. Your golden light will be chained to my shadow permanently. You'll be mine in every way that matters, a living battery for my power, and a trophy to remind the world that even the last sunstone, which can be claimed by darkness. No, the word came out as a whisper. That's slavery. You're asking me to give up everything I am. I'm asking you to pay the price for your people's survival. He stood, looking down at her with those merciless silver eyes. You summoned me, little witch. You asked for my power. This is what it costs. Refuse, and I return to my realm while your sisters die in agony. Accept, and the blight dies instead. The choice is yours, but choose quickly. My patience is not infinite. Elora's mind raced, searching desperately for another option, a loophole, anything that would save her people without sacrificing herself. But there was nothing. She'd known the price would be terrible, but this was beyond anything she'd imagined. She thought of Mira, barely 16, screaming as the blight consumed her from the inside. She thought of Celeste, who had raised her after her parents died, now lying on a pallet with black veins spreading across her chest. She thought of all the witches who depended on her, who had no choice but to trust that their last pure bloodline would save them. If I refuse, you let them all die? Her voice was hollow. I don't let anyone do anything, little witch. I simply decline to interfere in matters that don't concern me. Your plague, your problem. Unless, of course, you make it concern me by paying the price. Elora closed her eyes, reaching deep within herself for the core of her magic, that warm, golden light that had defined her entire existence. She felt it pulsing there, bright and pure, perhaps for the last time. I accept. The words left her mouth before she could second-guess them. The moment they did, the air in the chamber went absolutely still. Even the flickering torches froze mid-flame. Rhys's smile widened, sharp and triumphant. Then let us seal the bargain, little Sunstone. The binding. He moved faster than her eyes could track. One moment he was standing several feet away. The next his hand was wrapped around her throat, not choking, but holding her in place with absolute control. His other hand came up to cup her jaw, tilting her head to expose the curve of her neck. The ritual bite, he murmured, his breath cold against her skin. It will hurt. The darkness always does when it first touches the light. But you accepted the terms. There's no backing out now. Wait! Elora tried to summon her magic, to push him away, but his power was already wrapping around her like chains. Shadows coiled up her arms, across her chest, binding her in place. I need to understand the terms. What exactly does a bond? You'll understand soon enough. His teeth sank into the junction between her neck and shoulder, and Elora screamed. It wasn't just pain, it was invasion. His shadow magic poured into her through the wound, spreading through her bloodstream like ice water. She felt it wrap around her golden core, intertwining with her light magic in a way that felt fundamentally wrong. Oil and water, darkness and light, predator and prey, all forced into the same space, the same body, the same soul. Her sunstone magic fought back instinctively, flaring bright and hot, trying to burn away the invading darkness. But the shadows didn't retreat. Instead, they absorbed her light, feeding on it, growing stronger. The more she fought, the deeper the bond became. Through the connection, she felt him, truly felt him for the first time. The vast, crushing weight of his power, the cold emptiness at his core, where warmth should be, the loneliness of centuries spent as a king with no equal, a predator with no pack. And beneath it all, something older and darker, a curse that bound him to the shadows, that prevented him from ever truly walking in daylight. But he felt her too. She sensed his shock as her light touched the frozen wasteland of his soul. For the first time in centuries, warmth, actual, genuine warmth, pierced the eternal cold that had defined his existence. It was painful for him, like thawing frozen flesh, but also needed, desperately needed. The magic of their bond writhed and twisted, trying to find equilibrium between two fundamentally opposed forces. Golden light and silver shadow spiraled around each other, forming new patterns neither had ever seen before. Where they touched, reality seemed to blur, creating something that was neither light nor dark, but both simultaneously. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, Rhys pulled back. His teeth left her skin, and she saw that his mouth was stained with her blood. But the blood was glowing, golden and luminescent, slowly fading to silver as it absorbed his shadow magic. The wound on her neck sealed itself immediately, but it left a mark, a silver scar in the shape of a crescent moon, pulsing with dark power. She pressed her hand to it and gasped as she felt the connection solidify, becoming permanent, a chain between their souls that could never be broken. "It's done," Rhys said quietly, and for the first time she heard something other than cold amusement in his voice. He sounded unsettled. "The bond is sealed. You are mine now, Elora of the Sunstone Witches. You belong to the night." Elora tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her. The world tilted sideways, and she would have fallen if Rhys hadn't caught her. His hands were freezing cold, but through the bond, she felt the strange echo of warmth, her warmth, reflected back at her through perception. What did you do to me?" she whispered. "I claimed you." He lifted her easily, cradling her against his chest like she weighed nothing. "And now I'll fulfill my end of the bargain. Your plague will die tonight. But first, you need to see your new home. No, the sanctuary, my sisters, I need to help them. They'll be fine. The blight will be gone within the hour. My wolves are already spreading through your territory, consuming the infection. But you You're no longer a witch of the Sunstone Sanctuary. You are the coin that purchased my loyalty. You belong to the night now." Before she could protest further, the shadows rose up around them like a tide. The last thing Elora saw before darkness consumed her vision was the ritual chamber fading away, replaced by an endless void of silver-touched shadow. And through the bond, she felt Rhys's grim satisfaction at claiming something precious from the light. The bargain was sealed. The hunt had begun. Interlude, the Shadow Keep. Elora woke to the sound of howling. For a moment, she thought she was back in the sanctuary, listening to the wolves that sometimes roamed the forest borders. But these howls were different, deeper, more resonant, carrying notes of power that made her bones vibrate. She opened her eyes and immediately regretted it. The room she was in defied conventional geometry. The walls were made of what looked like solidified shadow, constantly shifting and reforming. The ceiling was impossible to see. It seemed to stretch upward into infinite darkness, occasionally punctuated by points of cold, silver light that might have been stars or might have been watching eyes. The bed beneath her was surprisingly soft, covered in furs she didn't recognize. They were silver gray and seemed to shimmer with internal light. The temperature was freezing, her breath misting in the air, but the furs kept her warm. She sat up slowly, her body aching from the ritual. The mark on her neck throbbed with each heartbeat, a constant reminder of what she'd done. When she touched it, she felt the bond pulse in response, and suddenly she could sense him. Rhys, somewhere in the keep, his presence a cold weight at the edge of her consciousness. "So you're awake." His voice echoed in her mind, and she gasped at the intimate invasion. "Don't bother trying to block me out. The bond goes both ways, little witch. I can feel your fear. It's delicious. Get out of my head," she said aloud, pushing against his presence with her magic. Golden light flared from her hands, and she heard him laugh, actually laugh, in her mind. "That's the spirit. I was worried I'd broken you completely. But you should know, little Sunstone, that your light only makes the bond stronger. We're connected now. Your magic feeds mine, and mine, well, you'll see." The door. She assumed it was a door, though it looked more like a tear in reality. Opened, and Rhys entered. He looked different here, in his own domain. More solid, more real. The shadows moved around him like loyal servants, and his silver eyes glowed with internal power. "Welcome to the Shadow Keep," he said, spreading his arms to indicate the impossible room. "Your new home." "This isn't my home. My home is a sanctuary with my sisters." She tried to stand, intending to march past him and find a way back, but the moment her feet touched the floor, her legs gave out. Rhys caught her before she hit the ground, his grip firm but not painful. "The bond takes time to adjust to," he explained, his tone almost clinical. "Right now, your body is trying to reconcile two fundamentally opposed types of magic. You'll be weak for a few days until the integration completes." "Integration?" She pushed against his chest, and was shocked to find that she could actually move him slightly. Her light magic created a small cushion between them, preventing full contact. "You said I'd be bound to you, not that I'd be, what, transformed into some kind of shadow creature. You won't be transformed, but you're no longer purely a creature of light. The bond has already begun changing you, just as it's changing me." He set her back on the bed with surprising gentleness. "Your magic will adapt. It has to, or the conflict will tear you apart from the inside." Elora felt panic rising in her chest. "You're saying I'll lose my power? My sunstone magic will be corrupted." "Not corrupted. Evolved." He sat on the edge of the bed, and she instinctively scuttled backward, putting distance between them. He noticed and smiled that cold smile. Your light will learn to exist alongside my shadow. It will become something new, something that's never existed before. Whether that's better or worse than what you had, well, we'll discover that together. Through the bond, she felt his emotions for the first time since the ritual. Curiosity, yes, but also something that might have been concern. He was genuinely uncertain about how this would affect them both. The blight, she said suddenly, remembering why she'd made this terrible bargain in the first place. You said your wolves were curing it. Are my sisters alive and recovering? My pack consumed the infection completely. By now, your sanctuary should be celebrating their miraculous salvation. His smile turned sharp. Though I doubt they'll be celebrating for long, once they realize the price you paid. They'll understand. They'd have done the same thing in my position. Would they? Rhys stood, moving to the window, another impossible feature, as they seemed to be underground, yet through it she could see a landscape of eternal night. Or would they let the plague run its course rather than bind themselves to the Night Alpha? I wonder, little witch, if you're as heroic as you think, or simply more cowardly about death than your sisters. The words stung because they touched the fear she'd been suppressing, that she'd made this choice not out of pure selflessness, but out of her own terror of watching everyone she loved die. You don't know anything about me, she said quietly. Don't I? He turned back to face her, and his silver eyes seemed to see straight through to her soul. I know you're the last of the pure bloodline. I know the pressure that legacy weighs on you every moment of every day. I know you're terrified of failing, of being the generation that lets the Sunstone magic die out. And I know that when faced with a choice between your own freedom and your sisters' lives, you didn't hesitate. That tells me everything I need to know. He moved closer, and this time she didn't retreat. The bond pulsed between them, and she realized he wasn't just studying her. He was trying to understand the strange warmth that her presence brought to his cold existence. You may own the contract, Alpha, she said, meeting his gaze with all the defiance she could muster, but you will never own my light. For a long moment, they stared at each other, predator and prey, darkness and light, captor and captive. Then Rhys smiled, and for the first time, there was something almost like genuine amusement in the expression. We'll see about that, little Sunstone. We'll see. Part 2, Shared Reality. The first night in the Shadow Keep was the longest of Elora's life. She refused to sleep in the bed Rhys had provided. Instead, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, her golden magic creating a faint barrier of light around her. It was a futile gesture. The bond meant he could reach her whenever he wanted, but it made her feel slightly less helpless. Through the bond, she could sense him moving through the keep. He was meeting with his pack, she realized, feeling echoes of their deference and fear. The shadow wolves were nothing like the normal wolves that roamed the forest near her sanctuary. These were creatures of pure predatory power, each one carrying a fraction of Rhys's shadow magic. She felt their hunger, their violence, their absolute loyalty to their alpha, and underneath it all, their fear, not external threats, but of Rhys himself. He ruled through power so absolute that even his own pack was terrified of displeasing him. Their loyal, his voice echoed in her mind, clearly sensing her observations. Fear is the most honest form of respect. That's not loyalty, she shot back. That's tyranny. Semantics. She felt his amusement. In the world of shadows, they're the same thing. She tried to block him out, to focus on her own thoughts, but the bond made it impossible. She could feel the cold vastness of the Shadow Keep, could sense the dozens of wolves prowling its halls, could even catch fragments of Rhys's thoughts when his guard was down. And what she found there shocked her. Loneliness. Crushing, absolute, centuries-old loneliness. He was surrounded by pack, by power, by creatures that would die at his command, but he was utterly, completely alone. No one challenged him. No one questioned him. No one dared to see him as anything other than the terrifying Night Alpha. Until now. Stop. His voice was sharp in her mind. Stay out of my thoughts, witch. You're the one who made us share a soul, she replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her mental voice. You don't get to complain when I see things you'd rather hide. The connection went silent, but she could still feel him, could sense the wall he was trying to erect between their minds. It wasn't working. The bond was too new, too raw. They were completely exposed to each other, and neither of them knew how to cope with it. Hours passed. Elora's golden barrier slowly faded as exhaustion overcame her magical reserves. She finally allowed herself to lean back against the wall, her eyes drifting closed despite her determination to stay alert. She didn't realize she'd fallen asleep until the nightmare began. The curse revealed. She was running through a forest of dead trees, their bare branches reaching toward a blood-red moon. Something was chasing her. Multiple somethings, their howls echoing through the darkness. She could feel their hunger, their desire to tear her apart. But worse than the fear of the hunt was the cold. A bone-deep, soul-crushing cold that seemed to emanate from inside her own chest. She looked down and saw a black vein spreading across her skin, just like the blight victims, except these veins carried shadow instead of sickness. The shadows were consuming her from the inside out, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She tried to summon her light magic, but when she raised her hands, they dissolved into smoke. This is the curse, a voice whispered from everywhere and nowhere. This is what I am. She woke with a gasp, her heart racing, her skin slicked with cold sweat. But she wasn't in the impossible room anymore. She was standing in a vast hall of frozen silver, and Rhys was in front of her, his expression unreadable. That wasn't your nightmare, she breathed. That was yours. I was in your head, experiencing your memories. The curse of the Night Alpha, he said quietly. Every generation of my line is born bound to the shadows. We gain immense power, but we pay for it with our humanity. The cold you felt? That's my reality. Every moment of every day, I exist in that frozen state. The shadows consume everything warm inside me, leaving only the predator. He turned away from her, and for the first time, she saw him as vulnerable. The bond should have been one-sided. I should have been able to drain your light, to use your magic as fuel, while giving nothing in return. But instead, he laughed bitterly. Instead, your warmth is bleeding into me through the connection, and I can't decide if that's a gift or a torture. Elora's anger wavered. She'd been so focused on her own loss, her freedom, her autonomy, her life as she'd known it, that she hadn't considered what the bond was doing to him. He'd spent centuries as a creature of pure cold, and now he was feeling warm for the first time. No wonder he seemed unsettled. How long? She asked. How long have you been cursed? I was born into it. 347 years ago, I was the firstborn son of the previous Night Alpha. The moment I took my first breath, the shadows claimed me. I've never known anything else. through the bond. She felt the weight of those centuries, the endless cold, the isolation, the slow erosion of everything human until only the predator remained. He wasn't just lonely, he was empty, hollowed out by the very power that made him king. The warmth hurts you, she realized. My light is painful because you've never felt anything like it. Yes. He turned back to her, and his silver eyes were filled with something she hadn't seen before, desperation. But I also can't stop seeking it out. It's like a dying man tasting water for the first time in years. Even if it burns, I need it. I need you. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest. This wasn't the cruel, confident alpha who had sealed the bargain. This was something else, something more real. Elora took a step toward him, her anger giving way to something more complex. You trapped me here. You bound me to you against my will. You took everything from me. I did. And now you're telling me that you need me? That you're dependent on me just as much as I am on you? Yes. The word was barely a whisper. She should have felt triumphant. She should have used this revelation to negotiate better terms, to demand her freedom. But instead, she felt the weight of shared suffering. Two prisoners of the same curse, bound together by a bargain neither of them fully understood. The plague is gone, she said finally. My sisters are safe. So what happens now? Rhys's expression hardened, the vulnerability sliding away behind his usual mask of cold authority. Now you learn to be mine. You learn to serve the Night Alpha. You learn to exist as a creature of both light and shadow. And if I refuse to learn, if I fight you every step of the way, his smile returned, sharp and predatory, then we'll both suffer for it. The bond punishes resistance from either side. But I've endured centuries of pain. Little witch, how long can you last? It was a challenge and a threat, and Elora felt her own magic rising in response. Golden light flared around her, pushing back the shadows, making Rhys wince as the warmth touched him. Long enough, she said firmly. I may be bound to you, but I'm not broken, and I'll fight you until you understand that. For a long moment, they stood there, two opposing forces locked in a battle. Neither could win. Then Rhys laughed, a genuine sound this time, not cold or mocking, but surprised. You're going to make this interesting, aren't you? Count on it. Part 3. The Binding's Consequences. The next 3 days were a brutal education in the reality of the soul bond. Elora discovered that resistance came at a price. Every time she tried to use her light magic against Rhys or to break free of his influence, the bond retaliated with waves of searing pain that left her gasping on the floor. But the pain went both ways. When she fought, Rhys felt it too, the warmth of her light burning through his shadows like acid. They were locked in a war of attrition, each one trying to outlast the other's stubbornness. On the second day, Rhys tried to force her to attend a pack gathering. She refused, pouring all her magic into a barrier of pure sunlight around her room. The light held for almost an hour, blazing so bright that the shadow wolves couldn't approach the doorway. But through the bond, she felt what it cost him. Her light didn't just keep his wolves at bay. It carved into his very essence, burning away pieces of his shadow magic. He endured it in silence for 59 minutes, his jaw clenched, sweat beading on his pale skin despite the freezing temperature. When he finally appeared in her doorway, his silver eyes were blazing with pain and fury. Enough! Make me stop, she challenged, even as she felt her own strength waning. He could have. He could have used the bond to force her submission, to compel her magic to obey his will. She felt him considering it, felt the terrifying scope of his power pressing against her consciousness. But he didn't. Instead, he simply stood there, allowing her light to burn him, until she finally lowered the barrier herself. She couldn't bear it. Couldn't bear feeling his agony echoing through the bond, knowing she was causing it. "Why didn't you force me to stop?" she asked, breathless and exhausted. "Because that would prove you right." He stepped into the room, his movements stiff with pain. "You think I'm a tyrant who rules only through domination. Maybe I am. But this bond, it's changed the rules. I can't simply take what I want from you without destroying us both." He sat down heavily on the edge of her bed, and for the first time, she saw him as something other than an untouchable predator. He looked tired, worn down. "You're not my prisoner," he said quietly. "You're my partner, however unwilling. Then let me go. Release me from a bond." "I can't." He met her gaze, and she saw the truth of it in his silver eyes. "Even if I wanted to, the ritual can't be undone. We're bound until one of us dies. That's the price we both paid." The reality of it crashed over her. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't something she could endure until she found a way to escape. This was forever. "Then we need rules," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Boundaries. I won't be your trophy or your pet. If I have to be bound to you, then you have to treat me as an equal." "An equal?" His laugh was bitter. "You're a witch barely past her 25th year. I'm a 300-year-old alpha. We're hardly equal. Then treat me as a partner. A reluctant one, but a partner nonetheless." She stood, summoning what remained of her strength. "No more ordering me around like one of your pack. No more invading my thoughts without permission. And no more using the bond to punish me when I disagree with you. And in return, I'll stop trying to burn you alive with my light magic. I'll cooperate, within reason." Rhys studied her for a long moment, and through the bond, she felt his calculation. He was weighing the benefits of having her cooperation against the cost of giving up some of his absolute control. Finally, he extended his hand. "Agreed. But understand this, Elora. Cooperation goes both ways. I expect you to actually try to make this work, not just wait for the first opportunity to stab me in the back." She took his hand, and the moment their skin touched, the bond flared to life. Golden light and silver shadow spiraled together, forming a new pattern, not harmony, but at least not open warfare. "I don't stab people in the back," she said firmly. "When I decide to kill you, Alpha, you'll see it coming." His smile was sharp and genuine. "I'm looking forward to it." Part 4. The threat emerges. On the 4th day, everything changed. Elora was in the keep's library, a vast chamber of impossible architecture where books floated in midair and shadows formed readable text on the walls. When an alarm sounded. It wasn't a physical sound, but a psychic scream that tore through the bond and left her clutching her head in agony. Rhys appeared instantly, moving through shadows to reach her side. "Stay here," he commanded. But she could feel through the bond that something was terribly wrong. "What's happening?" "An attack, on the border between my territory and yours." His silver eyes were blazing with cold fury. "Someone is targeting the boundary wards." Before she could respond, he was gone, dissolving into shadow and leaving her alone in the library. But through the bond, she could still see through his eyes, could feel his movements as he raced through the keep and out into the eternal night of his realm. What she saw made her blood run cold. The border between the Shadow Wolves' territory and the Sunstone Sanctuary was marked by ancient wards, protective barriers that stood for centuries, maintaining the fragile peace between light and dark. But now, those wards were shattering. And the thing destroying them was neither light nor shadow, but something else entirely. It was massive, easily twice the size of Rhys's wolf form, and it seemed to be made of pure corruption. Its body shifted between solid and smoke, covered in pulsing black and gold veins that looked sickeningly familiar. Where it touched the ground, the earth itself died, turning to ash and dust. "The blight," Elora whispered, though Rhys was miles away. Through the bond, she felt his shock mirror her own. It evolved, his voice echoed in her mind. "My wolves consumed the infection in your sanctuary, but they didn't destroy it. They absorbed it, and something has weaponized that absorbed corruption. The creature, she couldn't think of it as anything else, opened its massive jaws and released a roar that shattered reality itself. Space tore open around it, and through the rifts she saw more of them. Dozens, hundreds, an army of corrupted beasts, each one carrying a mix of light and shadow that should have been impossible. This is what happens when light and dark are forced together improperly. Rhys's thoughts were grim. We thought the bond between us was unprecedented, but someone else has been experimenting, trying to create weapons from a union of opposites. Elora's mind raced. The blight wasn't natural. It was created. Someone released it into the sanctuary as a test. And we gave them exactly what they needed when my wolves absorbed it. Rhys finished. They studied the interaction between your light and my shadow, and now they've replicated it, weaponized it. Through his eyes, she watched as his pack engaged the corrupted creatures. The shadow wolves were powerful, their darkness absolute, but these things were built to counter them. Every shadow attack was met with a burst of corrupted light that neutralized the darkness. Every physical strike was absorbed and converted into more corruption. His wolves were losing. "I'm coming to you," Elora said, already moving toward the door. "No, stay in the keep where it's safe. We're bound together, remember? That means when light and shadow are properly balanced, not corrupted. If these things are weapons made from twisted versions of our magic, then maybe we're the cure." She was running now, letting the bond guide her through the impossible architecture of the keep. "Tell me how to reach you." There was a pause, and she felt his internal struggle, his instinct to protect her warring with his strategic mind recognizing the truth of what she said. "The shadow paths. Focus on my presence through the bond and step into any darkness. The shadows will bring you to me." Elora didn't hesitate. She saw a patch of deep shadow in the corner of a hallway and stepped into it, letting the cold darkness consume her. The transition was nauseating. Reality folded in on itself, and for a moment she was nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. Then she was stumbling out of shadow at the border, the corrupted battlefield spreading out before her. Rhys was in his wolf form, massive and terrifying, his black coat seeming to absorb all light. He was locked in combat with one of the corrupted creatures, his jaws tearing into its smoky flesh only to have the wounds seal immediately. Elora didn't think. She simply acted. She thrust her hands forward and released her light magic, not as an attack, but as an offering. Pure, golden sunlight poured from her palms, and through the bond, she felt Rhys instinctively reaching for it. His shadow magic rose to meet her light, and for the first time, they didn't fight each other. They merged. Golden light and silver shadow spiraled together, forming something new, a magic that was neither light nor dark, but both simultaneously. It poured into the corrupted creature, and instead of being absorbed or neutralized, it acted like an antidote. The black and gold veins in the creature's body began to fade, the corruption burning away like morning mist. The creature screamed, a sound of pure agony, and then simply dissolved, its corrupted form unable to exist in the presence of true, balanced unity. Together, Rhys's voice was filled with sudden understanding. The bond isn't a weakness. It's a weapon. Then let's use it. What followed was a battle unlike anything either of them had experienced. They moved in perfect synchronization, their magic flowing between them through the bond. Where Elora's light touched, Rhys's shadow followed, the two forces amplifying each other instead of canceling out. The corrupted creatures fell one by one, their weaponized imbalance unable to withstand the genuine unity of the bond. The Shadow Wolves rallied, fighting with renewed ferocity now that their alpha's power had multiplied. But even as they fought, Elora felt something troubling through the bond. These creatures were just the vanguard. Somewhere, someone was watching this battle, studying how they fought together, learning how to counter this new combined magic. When the last creature dissolved, Rhys shifted back to human form, his chest heaving with exertion. Elora collapsed to her knees beside him, her magic completely drained. "Someone is experimenting with bonds," she said quietly, "creating corrupted versions to weaponize. This was a test, to see how we'd respond. And now they know we're stronger together." Rhys looked down at her, and for the first time since they'd met, there was no coldness in his silver eyes, only grim determination, which means they'll be back, with better weapons, better corruptions. Then we need to find them first. Elora struggled to her feet, accepting his offered hand. Whoever created the Blight, whoever is making these creatures, they're a threat to both our people. A threat to light and shadow both. He didn't release her hand, and she didn't pull away. Through the bond, she felt his acceptance of the reality they now faced. We need to work together. Truly together, not just out of necessity. "I'm still angry at you for binding me against my will," she said firmly. "And I'm still not apologizing for doing what was necessary to save your people." His smile was sharp. "But perhaps we can be angry at each other while also being allies." "Partners," she corrected. "Equals. That was the deal. Partners, then." He finally released her hand, and she immediately felt the absence of his cold touch. But this changes everything. If someone is weaponizing the bond between light and shadow, we need to understand our own connection better. Master it, before they figure out how to break it. Elora looked out at the scarred battlefield, at the ash and corruption that marked where the creatures had fallen. She thought of her sisters in the sanctuary, of the Shadow Wolves watching her with wary respect, of the bond that tied her to this cold, dangerous, impossibly complex alpha. "Then I guess we'd better get started," she said, "because something tells me this is just the beginning." Epilogue, the declaration. The emergency council was held in neutral territory, an ancient grove that belonged to neither light nor shadow, but to the old magic that predated both. Elora stood beside Rhys as representatives from a dozen magical factions gathered. The Sunstone Witches had sent Celeste, who had recovered from the Blight, but still bore the scars. Other covens sent their leaders. Even some human magical practitioners had come, drawn by rumors of the new threat. But it was the presence of the other alpha packs that made the gathering tense. 3 other wolf alphas had come, their eyes constantly flicking between Rhys and Elora with expressions of confusion and calculation. The night alpha has claimed the Sunstone, which one of them, a scarred brute named Kale, said with open contempt. "Is this some kind of peace offering? A hostage?" "Neither." Rhys's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. "She's my bonded partner. We share a soul contract sealed by ritual bite." The grove erupted in shocked exclamations. Such bonds were legendary. forbidden, and supposedly impossible between such fundamentally opposed magics. "It's true," Elora said, her voice carrying despite her exhaustion. She let her golden magic flare, and beside her, Rhys's silver shadow rose in response. The two magics spiraled together, forming the new pattern they discovered in battle. And this bond saved both our peoples from a corrupted plague. But that plague was just the first attack. She told them everything. The blight, the corrupted creatures, the evidence of someone experimenting with forced bonds between light and shadow. As she spoke, she watched the faces of the gathered leaders go from skeptical to terrified. Someone is trying to weaponize the union of opposites. Rhys continued when she finished. They're creating corrupted versions of what Elora and I share. And those weapons nearly destroyed my pack. They will come for yours next. So what do you propose? Celeste asked, her voice heavy with the weight of difficult decisions. An alliance? Between light and shadow. More than that. Elora stepped forward and felt Rhys's support through the bond. A unified front. We need to find whoever is behind this before they perfect their weapon. And we need to understand the bond between light and shadow, the real version, not the corrupted one, so we can counter what they're creating. You're asking us to trust you, Kale said slowly, his eyes fixed on Rhys. To trust the Night Alpha, who has been our enemy for centuries. I'm asking you to trust the evidence, Elora countered. To trust that a greater enemy is coming for all of us, and that divided, we'll fall. United, we have a chance. The debate raged for hours. Some leaders were ready to ally immediately, having seen the devastation of the Blight. Others were more cautious, pointing out the risks of trusting traditional enemies. And a few openly accused Rhys of orchestrating the entire crisis to consolidate power. But slowly, reluctantly, consensus formed. The threat was too great to ignore. And the bond between Elora and Rhys, the proof that light and shadow could coexist without destroying each other, offered a fragile hope. As the council disbanded, Celeste approached Elora, pulling her aside. "Are you truly all right?" the old witch asked softly. "We heard you sacrifice yourself to save us, that you're bound to him forever." Elora glanced back at Rhys, who was deep in conversation with another alpha. Through the bond, she felt his exhaustion, his weariness, but also his determination. He wasn't the cruel, cold tyrant she'd expected. He was complicated, damaged, and surprisingly principled when it mattered. "I'm bound to him," she confirmed, "and I'm still angry about it. But I'm also alive. We're all alive, and together, we're stronger than I ever imagined possible. Do you think you can trust him?" "I don't have to trust him. The bond won't let either of us betray the other without suffering for it." She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "But I'm starting to think that maybe eventually I could choose to trust him anyway." Celeste studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "You've changed, child. Your magic feels different. Deeper. That's because it is different." Elora summoned a small orb of light and watched his shadow automatically spiral around it. The two forces dancing in perfect balance. "I'm not just a Sunstone Witch anymore. I'm something new. Something that shouldn't exist, but does. And what does he get from this bond? What does the Night Alpha gain from sharing his power with you?" Elora thought of the warmth bleeding through the bond, of the way Rhys reached for her light, like a drowning man reaching for air. "Salvation," she said quietly. "He gets salvation from centuries of cold and loneliness. And I think maybe I get strength I never knew I could have." Final scene. The promise. Late that night, Elora stood on the balcony of her room in the Shadow Keep. watching the eternal darkness that stretched beyond. She still hated this place, the cold, the impossible architecture, the constant awareness of predatory wolves prowling below. But she was beginning to understand it. Rhys appeared beside her, moving through the shadows with his usual silent grace. They stood together in silence for a long moment, neither quite sure how to navigate this new reality. "The other alphas think I've gone soft," he said finally. "Binding myself to a witch, sharing my power, working with the light instead of against it. Let them think what they want. We both know the truth." "And what's that?" Elora turned to face him, meeting those silver eyes that no longer seemed quite so cold. "That we're both prisoners of this bond. But maybe we can be something more than that. Maybe we can be allies. Maybe even friends. Eventually, friends." He tested the word like it was foreign. "I'm not sure I know how to do that." "Neither do I. Not with you." She smiled slightly. "But we have time to figure out. A lifetime, apparently. A lifetime bound to me. Are you resigned to it, or are you still planning to find a way to break free?" It was a fair question, and she considered it seriously. The bond was permanent. The ritual couldn't be undone. She would spend the rest of her life tethered to this dangerous, complicated alpha who represented everything her people had been taught to fear. But she'd also seen his loneliness, his curse, his desperate need for connection that he'd buried under centuries of cold control. And through the bond, she'd felt him beginning to thaw, beginning to remember what it meant to feel something other than endless cold. "I'm resigned to it," she said finally, "but I'm also choosing to make the best of it. We're bound together, Rhys, for better or worse. And I think maybe there's a reason the moon goddess allowed this to happen. A reason beyond just stopping the blight. You think we're meant to be some kind of symbol? Proof that light and shadow can coexist. Maybe, or maybe we're just two people trying to survive impossible circumstances." She held out her hand, palm up, and summoned a small flame of golden light. "But whatever we are, we're stronger together than apart. The battle proved that." Rhys stared at the light in her palm, then slowly extended his own hand. Shadows spiraled from his fingers, wrapping around her light. Instead of smothering it, the shadow made the light burn brighter, while the light gave shape and purpose to the formless dark. "Stronger together," he agreed quietly. "I never thought I'd say that about anyone." "Neither did I." She let the magic fade, and they stood in the darkness together. "But here we are. Here we are." He paused, then added in a tone that almost sounded uncertain, "Thank you for fighting beside me today. You didn't have to. You could have stayed in the keep and let my wolves handle it. We're partners now, remember? Equals. That means when your people are threatened, they're my people too." She smiled slightly. "Besides, I needed to prove I wasn't just your trophy, that I'm worth the price you paid for that contract. You proved that the moment you stepped onto that battlefield." His expression softened, barely, but enough for her to notice. "You're more than I expected. Elora of the Sunstone Witches. Much more. It wasn't love. It wasn't even really affection yet. But it was acknowledgement, respect, the first fragile foundation of something that might, someday, become partnership in truth rather than just in magic." "Get some rest," Rhys said, turning to leave. "Tomorrow we begin training properly. If we're going to face whatever created those corrupted creatures, we need to master this bond completely." "Rhys." He stopped, looking back at her. "I'm still angry at you for binding me without true consent. I know. And I'm still going to fight you when I think you're wrong. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. But... She hesitated, then continued. I don't regret it. The bond. Not anymore. It saved my sisters. It might save a lot more people before this is over. So, thank you for accepting the bargain, even if you did it for selfish reasons. Something flickered in his silver eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or the beginnings of actual warmth. Get some rest, little Sunstone. You're going to need your strength. He dissolved into shadow and was gone, but through the bond, Elora could still feel him, his presence a cold weight that was slowly, gradually becoming less unpleasant, almost comforting in its constancy. She looked out at the eternal night of the shadow realm, then down at her hand where golden light still flickered beneath the skin. Light and shadow, sun and moon, warmth and cold, claimed by night, forged by fate, and somehow, impossibly, beginning to find balance in the darkness.
To be continued. The Shadow Wolf's bargain has only just begun. Elora and Rhys must hunt the mysterious enemy, creating corrupted bonds while navigating their own explosive connection. Can a witch of the sun truly tame a wolf of shadow? Or will their forced partnership become the very weapon their enemies need to destroy them both? Subscribe to discover what happens next in this dark fantasy romance, where hatred and desire walk the razor's edge, and the line between captor and partner becomes dangerously blurred.